My daughter-in-law's shocking plan to send me away was exposed. An incredible secret changed everything. Margaret's heart raced as she tentatively approached the attic, her sanctuary filled with the ghosts of memories preserved in dust and shadow. The air was thick with nostalgia. Just days ago, her son, Jake, and his new wife, Rachel, had dropped a bombshell that echoed in her mind. Rachel's blithe suggestion that it was time for her to consider an assisted living facility for the good of the family. The very notion ignited a firestorm of resentment and despair within her. How had it come to this? She had dedicated her life to building a home, yet now she felt like an outsider, overshadowed by Rachel's ambition. As she sifted through decades of old letters and fraying photo albums, her fingers trembled. Here lay fragments of her life, joyful family gatherings, laughter echoing through the halls. Now they felt distant, replaced by the rigid atmosphere of obligation and unspoken tensions. Margaret's mind was a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. Fear of losing her independence collided with the realization of her waning place in her own family. She was not ready to surrender her life, yet the weight of loneliness pressed down harder with each passing moment. The notion of moving was not merely practical. It felt like a betrayal, an erasure of her role as matriarch. "I can't let this happen," she whispered to herself as she leaned against a stack of boxes, breath hitching. The suffocating dread of a future stripped of family ties gnawed at her. Did Jake even understand how serious this was? Would he stand up to Rachel, or had he already been swayed by her driven nature? Before she could lose herself in despair, a glimmer caught her eye. A yellowed envelope tucked away in the corner labeled Family Legacy. Her pulse quickened as she opened it, recognizing her late husband's careful handwriting. Inside, a treasure unfolded, not just financial assets, but ideals, a manifesto of their relationship, outlining the values of loyalty, love, and resilience. His words echoed in her mind, a lifeline throwing into relief the disparity between his cherished principles and Rachel's calculating approach to family life. With every sentence read, she felt a swell of determination rise within her, igniting the embers of her independence. But could she confront Jake? The mere thought brought a tremor to her hands. What if he dismissed her? What if Rachel manipulated him into seeing her as outdated and unnecessary? Just then, as if summoned by her doubts, Rachel burst through the door, her expression as sharp as ever. "Margaret, I need to talk," she said, scanning the attic's disarray, eyes narrowing. The tension thickened, and Margaret's pulse raced. Just as Rachel's veneer of control began to crack, Margaret found herself teetering on the edge of a confrontation she had dreaded for so long.
Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. "Who do you think you are telling me how to live?" Margaret snapped, her voice thick with unbridled emotion. Rachel's facade wavered for the briefest moment, vulnerability flashing through her confident exterior. "I'm trying to help, Margaret," she shot back, but the tension in her voice mirrored Margaret's own turmoil. With the hidden legacy at the forefront of her mind, Margaret's resolve deepened, her heart pounding not just with fear, but with the urgent need to protect what was left of her family. The stakes were rising, feelings escalating toward a breaking point where loyalty would be tested, friendships strained, and ambitions laid bare. As Margaret prepared to defend her place, she felt the world closing in, the fate of her family hanging in the balance, while Rachel eyed her like a challenger on the battleground. In the silence that followed, they began to understand that the real fight was not just for a house or a title, but for the soul of their family itself. Margaret's chest tightened as she stood toe-to-toe with Rachel, the air electric with unresolved conflict. For the first time, she felt seen, not as the frail matriarch Rachel assumed was easy to dismiss, but as a woman ready to reclaim her narrative. "You think you can dictate my life because you want me out of the way?" The words tumbled out, fierce and clear, deflecting the walls of Rachel's calculated argument. Rachel scoffed, her confident armor cracking. It's not like that. This is about making a decision that reflects what's best for everyone. But even as she spoke, Margaret could see through the facade. She felt the fissures in Rachel's logic that desperately sought to cover the real intent: control. What's best for whom, exactly? Margaret countered, her voice steady, defying the tremor inside. You envision a life uncluttered by my presence, don't you? A neat little family without the clutter of real history? Beneath her words simmered years of emotional neglect that had been building like a storm, ready to unleash fury. Rachel's expression shifted to one of indignation, eyebrows raised with disbelief. This was not the meek mother-in-law she anticipated. She opened her mouth to respond, but Margaret pressed on, bolstered by her husband's legacy and the realization of her own strength. I built this home, this family. I chose love over ambition every time I came to this kitchen to bake countless birthday cakes, comforted sleepless children, and welcomed friends and family. My life is not merely a burden, it's the foundation upon which you stand. I will not be pushed aside. Each word felt like a nail driven into the framework of their fractured relationship, marking ground that was now hers to defend. Silence fell heavily between them, and the attic, once a relic of memory, transformed into a battlefield of ideologies. In the depths of her heart, Margaret felt liberated, surrounded by old photographs, now symbols of her undying influence on her family. I can have my own life that doesn't interfere with yours. Rachel's voice trembled, suddenly defensive. There was vulnerability amidst the anger, a crack in the armor of her ambition. I'm just trying to make things work. For Jake, for us. Is this how you really think it can work? Margaret demanded, searching Rachel's eyes for transparency. By casting me aside? By framing it all as reasonable care? You need to realize that family cannot be built on erasing history. As the two women faced each other, each grounded in their different perspectives, Margaret acknowledged her own confusion. Maybe Rachel genuinely believed her posture was for the greater good. In a way, it felt more like a revelation, both women clinging to their ideals, but standing on opposite shores, terrified to step toward one another. With a deep breath, Margaret let the edges of her resolve soften a fraction, recognizing that their paths were intertwined whether Rachel liked it or not. Let's find a way to coexist, but I refuse to be a shadow. If you want to claim me as family, understand that I will not remain silent at the edges. Rachel's stare faltered, and the lines of her conflict began to expose an unsettling truth. Both were struggling against an overbearing need to be recognized, to feel valid, which left the relationship stunted at its roots. In that moment, amidst a flurry of testimony from decades past, the path before Margaret divided further. Would she allow herself to entertain the possibility of rebuilding some semblance of respect and cooperation? Or would this confrontation only serve as the beginning of a deeper schism that could unravel everything she had fought for? Before she could voice her thoughts, the attic shook with the sudden thud of a door slamming below. Jake's voice echoed up the stairs, calling for them. Mom, Rachel, what's going on? Fear gripped Margaret. The stakes weren't merely terse conversations anymore. They were tied to family integrity and the future she desperately wanted. How could she protect her family while remaining true to herself? And what if Jake's arrival spelled the end of the moment she so fiercely claimed? The tension in the air wrapped around her like a vice, amplifying the storm brewing within.
As she took that deep breath, Margaret realized the true battle was just beginning, and her next steps were crucial. How to navigate this familial waters when hearts were torn between duty and desire. She could feel the weight of the future pressing down heavier than ever. It was time to reveal the depths of her resolve. Jake, we need to talk, Margaret called back, ready to face whatever came next. But would the revelation of her strength transcend the fragile dynamics of their relationships, or would it tear them apart for good? Margaret's heart raced as she turned her gaze towards the door, where the muffled sounds of Jake's footsteps were growing more insistent. Her mind whirled, thoughts swirling like fallen leaves in a gusty wind. This moment felt monumental, an existential fork in the road, not just for her, but for her entire family.
Jake's voice, slightly agitated now, echoed up the stairs, pulling Margaret back from the precipice of her thoughts. Seriously, what's happening? His tone struck a chord of urgency. Beneath the calm surface, she felt waves of uncertainty crashing against her fragile resolve, but she willed herself to stay centered. This time, she wouldn't shrink back. This was her moment to reclaim the narrative. "Jake," she called out, keeping her voice firm despite the tremor that lurked beneath it. "I need you to come up here right now." The moment Jake bounded up the stairs, the air thickened with the gravity of the situation. He stood there, dark-haired and wide-eyed, glancing between his mother and Rachel. "What's with all the shouting? I thought I heard something break." He attempted a laugh, but it fell flat, weighted by the tension suffusing the attic. Margaret took a breath, sensing Rachel's presence next to her, their shared conflict palpable. If Jake's face was a canvas of confusion, Margaret was eager to paint it red with clarity. She needed Jake to understand. It wasn't just a conflict. This was about family, legacy, and his future. Both women stood on opposite ends of the emotional spectrum. Rachel's posture, tight and defensive, betrayed her anxiety. But beneath Margaret's exterior of composure lay the roiling waters of determination. She'd spill the truth, one way or another. "Jake, you know I love our family," she began, eye contact unwavering. "But there's a plan that Rachel has proposed, a plan I can't allow to happen." Rachel shot Margaret a warning look, an unspoken plea for silence. However, the heat of their confrontation had ignited a defiance that refused to extinguish. "Mom, what's she talking about?" Jake's brows knitted together, and it was evident he was trying to wade through the murky waters of suspicion and familial loyalty. "Your mother-in-law wants to make a decision about my future, to send me away," Margaret said, her voice steady and unyielding. "She sees me as a hindrance, as someone getting in the way of her plans for you and for the life she believes we all deserve." "No," Jake's voice echoed harshly against the attic walls, disbelief etched across his face. "That can't be true. Rachel wouldn't." But Margaret pressed on, her own vulnerability finding strength in honesty. "We've been wrestling with our perspectives, but this isn't simply about differences of opinion. I refuse to be devalued in my own family." Rachel exhaled sharply, her expression a volatile mix of frustration and desperation. "Margaret, you're twisting my words," she protested, but the wind had changed direction. No longer was she the one controlling the discourse. "I'm not trying to kill your dreams," Margaret said, raising her voice over the tension crackling between them. "But you need to understand the gravity of pushing me aside. This isn't just my home. It's the heart of our family. I raised you to understand history matters." Jake stood silent, the weight of the confrontation connecting the threads of his emotions. He was caught between two conflicting forces, his loyalty to Rachel and his love for his mother. Margaret could see the shift in his demeanor as her words sank in. "Mom," he finally said, voice low and uncertain, "I never wanted any of this." Margaret felt her throat tighten, the softness in his tone evoking a rush of maternal instinct. "I know, Jake, but sometimes we have to confront what no longer serves us, not just for you, but for all of us to stand together." As Jake digested her words, Margaret realized a crucial decision lay ahead, not just for herself, but for Jake, who often veiled his feelings behind laughter and flexibility. What was she willing to sacrifice for harmony, and could she lead them towards understanding before it slipped fully out of reach? Just then, Rachel exhaled softly, her defenses visibly crumbling, a reluctant recognition of the rawness in her own strategy for control. "I never meant for it to come to this," she murmured, revealing a depth of vulnerability that threatened to shift the power dynamics again. Would this moment serve as a turning point, or merely a few flimsy patches in a tearing fabric? Margaret stood firm, ready to navigate through the emotional storm that loomed ahead, aware that the stakes were higher than ever. "My choices, my voice, they matter. We can't lose sight of that," Margaret asserted, a new flame igniting in her words. Yet, with the revelation swirling in the air, a question lingered heavy. Could they emerge from this confrontation stronger, or would it fracture them in ways they could not yet anticipate? As she considered this dawning realization, the tension thickened. It felt as though the answers were within reach, but just outside her grasp. What awaited them on the other side of these revelations? Would family bonds strengthen or fracture irrevocably?
Margaret's mind raced ahead, and a pivotal decision loomed like a cloud of thunder ready to break. Margaret stood at the precipice of revelation, adrenaline coursing through her veins as she felt the air shift around her. Everything was on the line now. She glanced at Rachel, who echoed a mixture of surprise and regret, clearly unprepared for the confrontation to unfold in such a raw manner. The realization that she had underestimated the depth of Margaret's conviction hit like a punch. "Jake," she pressed, directing her focus back to her son, whose gaze darted between the two women, a silent battleground where emotional stakes loomed large. "You know me. I've been here for you every step of the way. I shaped who you are, not just with love, but with tough lessons. I didn't teach you to hide from challenges. Can't you see that?" His silence weighed heavy in the attic, amplifying the unspoken tension. Margaret felt the dread of potential fracture stirring within her, but she also felt the kernel of empowerment within her as she continued to express her truth. "Rachel's plan, the way it undermines me, it undermines our history too. Pretending that family ties can be splintered for the sake of a better life is naive. We can redefine what our family means without discarding the past." Jake's expression began to soften, a flicker of understanding flashing across his face. "Mom, Let her speak," Rachel interjected, her voice almost pleading, though she struggled to maintain her composure. There it was, the first crack in her armor, and Margaret seized it. "Thank you, Rachel," she said, her voice steady now. "But this is bigger than you and me. This is about Jake and his future, a future that should include all the dimensions of who we are, not just the sanitized version you envision." Margaret was struck by clarity. She was in the right, not merely for herself, but for Jake's future. She thought back to her own childhood, a series of missed connections, mismanaged expectations, and the invisible chains of hidden feelings that had drawn family members apart. She wouldn't let that happen again. The room caught light in a different way as she prepared to evoke her vision for the family she wanted, the relationships she yearned to strengthen. "I'm not trying to take away any dreams, Jake. What I'm asking for is an acknowledgement of my presence in all this. I have options too. I have a life, aspirations that don't need to be just this quiet existence in the shadow of others' plans." Jake opened his mouth as if to respond, yet silence hung between them again. Margaret understood the complexity of choice often came with the weight of fatigue. "Don't give up. This was not the time to waver. I deserve a say in how we move forward, just as you both do," I asserted. "I'm an integral part of this family, a real voice that desires to be heard. Whatever decision is made, it has to include me, not exclude me."
The words felt like a cathartic release, resonating with strength born out of years of silence. Suddenly, Rachel took a step closer, vulnerability surfacing in her expression. "I didn't know how to balance everything. I thought I was protecting Jake's future by assuming control. But now," her voice quaked, "I can see how that's simply not right." Margaret's heart softened. This moment held potential. Some bridge to rebuild damaged trust lay within Rachel's acknowledgement. "We're all learning, Rachel. Growth requires struggle, and I'm here to navigate this with you." Jake nodded slowly, and Margaret saw him processing their words, weighing them against a lifetime of interactions. Perhaps she had struck the right chord, a note that resonated through his often carefree demeanor. "Let's talk then," he finally said, his voice gaining strength through resolve. "Let's figure this out together. I didn't realize how much was at stake, but it needs to be a real conversation, not just a confrontation." The light shifted again in the attic as hope nudged its way into the air, replacing anger and confusion with possibility. They had veered towards the road less traveled, and now a cautious optimism simmered beneath the surface. Could this confrontation ignite a new way of relating while respecting their history? But even as they tentatively began to step into this newfound understanding of mutual respect, the risks loomed. How could they ensure that this was not just a moment, but a sustainable shift? Would Rachel adapt further, or would her insecurities resurface before the healing could take shape? The journey towards resolution had just begun, but Margaret's instincts warned her of the slippery path ahead. What had been unveiled would require constant vigilance to maintain. Personal growth was rarely linear, and she had to be prepared for what came next. Margaret's chest tightened at the thought. Would this fragile peace last, Or was it merely a hiding place for messy emotions yet to explode? She steeled herself, ready for whatever waited on the horizon, knowing that to reclaim her future, she would have to fully step into her power. The weight of this realization poured through her, igniting a determination to confront whatever unexpected challenges would arise from this tentative foundation. After all, growth often lurks in moments where clarity met the unknown. What would be revealed next, and how would their family navigate complexities yet unseen? The afternoon sun streamed through the attic window, its warm rays filtering dust motes in the air, yet the brightness of the room felt stark against the emotional tempest swirling within Margaret. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself as she recognized that this moment held more weight than she initially grasped. She had advanced into unfamiliar territory, not solely for herself, but also for Jake and Rachel, and the realization clung to her like a cloak of responsibility.
Mom, Jake's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts as he shifted closer, his brow furrowed. What does this mean for us moving forward? You keep talking about acknowledgement, but how do we blend our lives without losing what makes us us? Margaret felt the weight of his inquiry. His desire for clarity matched the complexity of their situation. She paused, her pulse quickening, considering her next words carefully. It means we engage honestly with one another. It means we carve out space for all our voices, even when it's uncomfortable. Jake, family isn't just about being together at the dinner table. It's about sharing our fears and dreams openly. A faint smile flickered on Jake's face, a signal of hope that perhaps he was beginning to understand. Yet Margaret was acutely aware that this moment was as fragile as glass. She glanced at Rachel, who appeared torn between hopeful engagement and lingering defensiveness, her earlier vulnerability now shadowed by uncertainty. Rachel, she began, can you commit to this as well, to renegotiating our dynamic? Rachel's arms darted away momentarily, and for a moment Margaret feared she'd retreat behind her comfortable facade. However, she forced herself to meet Margaret's gaze, a determination settling into her features. I want to, Rachel admitted, her voice tinged with reluctance, yet edged with sincerity. But it's going to be difficult. Margaret nodded, sensing the weight of Rachel's acknowledgement as a small victory. This was growth, but it was also a challenge, a potential turning point fraught with difficulty. Nothing worth doing is ever easy. We need to be open, even when it's painful or scary, if about transforming misunderstandings into shared commitments. Jake interjected. We need to set boundaries, though. Not just for you, Mom, but for Rachel and me, too. What does that look like? Margaret felt her heart swell with pride. He was grasping the gravity of their collective journey, articulating the need for respect and sanity in their redefined family. It means clarifying expectations. It means ensuring our needs are not pitted against one another, but presented as part of a holistic family need. We must... Yet, Margaret felt a prickle of doubt rise within her. Was all of them, prepared for this? The prospect of dismantling deeply entrenched habits and expectations loomed larger now, and the inherent discomfort of vulnerability made her question how much they were willing to risk. The sun dipped further, and shadows stretched across the attic as Margaret contemplated potential pitfalls ahead. How would past resentments shape their future conversations? Would Rachel stay committed to this newfound openness, or would her instinctual urge to protect falter under pressure? These questions lodged in Margaret's mind, forming a knot of uncertainty. She realized their shared journey was not merely an exercise in harmony, but also a labor of courage. As the sun set behind the horizon, casting long shadows in the room, Margaret took a deep breath and steadied her resolve. They stood on the brink of something profound, but first they had to confront the tumult that lingered beneath the surface. With one final thought, she silently vowed to remain vigilant, to continue pushing for transparency and connection while bracing for any fallout. Their family would either rise together or fracture further apart, but she was determined to ensure it was the former. Little did she know, as these revelations brewed, another storm loomed on the horizon, one that tested not just her commitment, but the very fabric of their intertwined lives. Was she truly ready for what lay ahead, and could her newfound assertiveness withstand the temptations of retreat when faced with yet another challenge? Margaret's determination solidified into a plan as the evening darkened the attic around them. She knew they needed a structured approach to sustain the flickering hope that had ignited in their conversation. Let's establish a family meeting schedule, she proposed, her voice steady despite the uncertainty creeping into her mind. a time when we can all express ourselves without the distractions of daily life, a dedicated space for us to talk. Jake nodded, a look of consideration crossing his face. And how often, he asked, his brow still furrowed with thought. Weekly, she replied, but we'll also need flexibility. If someone feels overwhelmed, we reschedule. It's about creating a culture of openness. Margaret's suggestion felt like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. She could sense both the trepidation and buoyancy of their collective endeavor stirring within her family. Rachel shifted, an air of reluctant acceptance about her. I think that could work, if everyone really commits. We need to actually want this, right? Margaret absorbed Rachel's words, recognizing a fraction of vulnerability masked beneath her skepticism. Yes, Rachel, it starts from a place of choice. Margaret affirmed the principle she'd long underestimated. Change wasn't merely about actions. It was about a shared willingness to embark on a collective journey, however daunting.
In her mind, the room expanded to accommodate each of their unspoken truths. Would Jake's burgeoning maturity stand firm against the tug of old patterns? Would Rachel's hesitation yield to constructive dialogue, or would she retreat behind her defenses? Each question felt like a stepping stone, guiding her toward the inevitable conclusion that they were on the cusp of transformation or collapse. As they finalized their tentative meeting format, Margaret realized they were forging a new aspect of their family identity. But despite the flickers of success, she couldn't shake the chill of doubt that began to set in. The comfort of her previous role, defined by control and distance, seemed perilous to leave behind. Would she falter when the going got tough, particularly in the face of Rachel's inevitable challenges? That night found Margaret awake long after the household fell silent. The dark corners of her mind replayed the day's conversations, the echoes of their anxiety swirling through her thoughts. She remembered the frequency with which she'd hidden beneath the weight of her responsibilities, opting for confrontation rather than collaboration. Fear of vulnerability had often led her to impose rather than engage, a strategy that may not withstand the storm that now threatened. The following morning, Margaret carefully crafted an email to her therapist, something she had avoided since the reconciliation talks began. Reaching out for guidance felt like relinquishing the reins, yet the wisdom imparted during their sessions had never been more vital. She pressed send, the act a tangible reminder of her evolving perspective on support and openness. But a new storm swiftly emerged, one she had not anticipated. As she prepared breakfast, her phone buzzed insistently, alerting her to a breaking news story featuring a familiar name. Growing concern transformed into disbelief. Rachel's biological father had been arrested on serious charges. Margaret's stomach sank. All their progress felt under threat of exposure, as old wounds hinted at surfacing again. Suddenly confronted with the specter of Rachel's unresolved past, Margaret felt her resolve waver. She grasped the kitchen counter, instinctively searching for stability. How would they navigate the fallout? Would Rachel spiral back into a darker place? Deep breath. Margaret knew the moment of truth was fast approaching. She needed clarity, not just for herself, but for everyone. Gathering her thoughts, she steeled herself. Now, more than ever, vulnerability could either fortify them or shatter their recent advancements, but she was unwilling to let fear dictate their narrative any longer. With determination edging ever closer to desperation, Margaret considered Rachel's reaction. The family meeting's foundation was shaky, and she had no idea how it would hold against this new looming influence.
She could almost hear the echoes of their promises and new agreements reverberating like a pulse in the back of her mind as she contemplated what lay ahead. This was no longer merely about family dynamics, but about unraveling the complexities they weren't quite prepared to face. In the coming moments, decisions would need to be made, ones that would define the course of their transformation or further distance them from the fragile bond they had begun to forge. What would Rachel's revelation bring to the surface? The tension hung heavy as Margaret nervously awaited the unfolding narrative, each uncertainty a potentially defining moment in their individual and collective stories. The phone buzzed incessantly, shaking Margaret from her spiral of thoughts. The news headline flashed ominously across her screen, and she felt the color drain from her face. This was not the way she envisioned beginning their path to openness. She needed to gather her composure, to be the anchor for her family. Margaret decided to address the situation directly. The family meeting format they'd agreed upon had been intended for sharing concerns, but now it felt immediate and urgent. They needed to talk about Rachel's biological father, to confront the darkness that had been lurking in the background of their lives. She hurriedly set the table for breakfast, her mind racing. What would Rachel think? Would Jake understand the gravity of the situation? As she prepared the food, her hands moved mechanically, mirroring the tumult inside her. "Mom, what's wrong?" Jake asked, entering the kitchen, accustomed to sensing his mother's anxiety. Margaret took a moment before replying, searching for words that would not alarm him disproportionately. "There's been troubling news regarding Rachel's father. We'll need to discuss it later today at our meeting." Jake's brow furrowed, a hint of discontent flashing across his features. "Is he back again? I thought he was out of the picture for good." "He is," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But this situation is larger than previous issues. It involves things we haven't really addressed." With breakfast completed, they gathered around the table. Rachel shuffled in, her posture tense, eyes downcast. Margaret's heart constricted at the sight. She had hoped today would illuminate the path forward rather than dredge up old memories. Every instinct screamed at her to shield Rachel from harm, yet she understood that shielding wouldn't promote healing. As they sat in silence, the weight of the day ahead hung heavily in the air. Returning to her earlier resolve, Margaret broke the awkward quiet. "We need to be upfront today. We've made a commitment to open dialogue, and that includes discussing Rachel's father." Immediately, tension crackled through the room. Rachel's eyes flickered up, revealing a mix of defiance and fear. "What's there to discuss? He's just a criminal. He's not worth our attention." Margaret noticed the defensiveness in Rachel's voice. "That's exactly the kind of thing we need to explore. I understand this may bring up uncomfortable feelings, but I believe we can face them together." Rachel's gaze dropped again, her walls rising. This was not an easy conversation, and Margaret risked pushing Rachel further away if she wasn't careful. "Rachel, I want you to know you're not alone in this," Margaret said softly. "I can't pretend to understand what you've been through, but I'm here. We're all here. We need to talk about how this affects you." Rachel's silence felt like a stone wall separating them, vulnerability countering the instinct to retreat. It was a moment of truth. Margaret sensed this was a crossroads. "I don't want to talk about him. I don't want to think about the conversations we had before he went away. It was horrible," Rachel finally spat out, her voice rising, frustration spilling forth. "Exactly," Margaret said, meeting Rachel's fierce gaze. "It was horrible, horrible for all of us, but burying it won't make it go away. It just festers. We can't ignore it any longer." As Margaret navigated through Rachel's vehement reactions, she found a flicker of her own earlier fears rising in response. She had fought against her urge to dominate discussions and instead aimed to empower her family. This was her opportunity to redefine her role, to transform the barrier between them into a bridge. But how could she foster growth without stepping on the very emotions they needed to explore? Margaret took a deep breath. "I will support you, Rachel, but I need you to meet me halfway. We face this together, whatever may come." The tumult of emotions felt like an ocean, waves crashing one moment, stilling the next, but Margaret chose certainty. She was venturing into the murky waters of vulnerability, kicking against the instinct to hold back. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, echoing through the silence like a thunderclap. Who could be here now? The uncertainty flooded Margaret, overshadowing her resolve. Rachel's expression shifted instantly to alarm, and Margaret felt her pulse quickened as a new wave of anxiety washed over her. What awaited them beyond that door? Would it bring an opportunity for connection or another disturbance in their fragile equilibrium? Margaret's heart raced, a whirlwind of emotions eclipsing her earlier resolve. The doorbell rang again, the persistent sound pressing down like an impending storm. She glanced at Rachel, whose face had turned pale, eyes wide with trepidation. It was as if the walls of their carefully constructed home were closing in, threatening to swallow them whole. "Should I get it?" Jake offered, his voice slightly shaky, as he stood to cross the room. "No," Margaret responded, a spike of urgency catching her off guard. "I'll handle it." She approached the door, her steps heavy with apprehension. What lay beyond could shatter the fragile peace they had fought to nurture. Gripping the doorknob, she reminded herself of the commitment they had made to face challenges as a family. Swinging the door open, Margaret was met with an unexpected sight. A woman stood before her, an air of familiarity draping over her like a heavy cloak. It was Sarah, an old friend from her university days, someone she hadn't seen in years. Margaret's breath caught. Unease settled in her stomach. "Margaret," Sarah said, her voice warm yet strained. "I got your message. I thought it was time we talked." Margaret's mind spun. What had she inadvertently shared with Sarah? But right now, the only thing that mattered was Rachel, who had remained silent, observing from the kitchen. "Can we talk in private?" Sarah persisted, glancing over Margaret's shoulder, her eyes narrowing onto Rachel. "Not right now," Margaret replied, her tone firm. "This isn't a good time." "Please, Margaret, I wouldn't have come back if it wasn't urgent. It's about Rachel," Sarah pressed, her voice a blend of urgency and sincerity. Those 4 words struck Margaret with the weight of an anvil. Rachel needed to hear this, she thought, feeling a mix of anger and concern. Open dialogue had been her aim, but how could she steer the conversation with an outside voice involved? "Fine," Margaret said at last, her resolve congealing into an uneasy acceptance. "Come inside." She led Sarah into the living room, where Jake still stood, confusion etched on his face. Margaret felt her emotions spiral again as she introduced Sarah, wishing to anchor the moment with familiarity. "Jake, this is Sarah. She's an old friend." The tension coiled thicker as Sarah turned her focus on Rachel, who had withdrawn into herself, crossing her arms defensively. "Rachel, I hope you don't mind me intruding. I need to tell you something important about your dad," Sarah began, her voice softening. That was it. The dam broke. Rachel's eyes glimmered with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Why should I listen to anything about him? He's nothing to me." "Rachel, please," Margaret interjected, feeling the unease swell. She had fought so hard to maintain the buoyancy of truth and vulnerability in their family. Yet here was an unexpected flood threatening to submerge everything. "Rachel, I know you feel anger towards him, but this may change your perspective," Sarah urged gently. "Change my perspective? What more can there possibly be?" Rachel shot back, her voice sharp yet trembling. I sensed the atmosphere thickening with a complex blend of emotions, fear, frustration, and a desperate yearning for clarity. I wondered if this was a moment they needed to embrace, or if it was better left unexamined. Watching Rachel's expression twist with turmoil, Margaret felt a surge of determination. Navigating this conversation might unlock a door to understanding that had long been shut.
"Let's hear what Sarah has to say," Margaret finally decided, both to quell the simmering tension and to indeed usher in a new, unexpected chapter of their shared journey. As Sarah began to speak, each word weighed heavily in the room. The truth hung above them, flickering like an uncertain light. It was time for a confrontation, a deep dive into the murky depths of their family history. Would this conversation unveil truths that divided them further, or could it bridge the fractures created by the past? How much more could Rachel endure before she broke? Margaret steeled herself. The moment of reckoning was here, and the stakes had never been higher. It was becoming clear that healing required facing more than just Rachel's father. They were inching closer to something immense, a revelation that could redefine them all. What further secrets lay beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed? Rachel's defiance hung in the air like an oppressive fog, each of Sarah's words adding weight to the growing uncertainty around them. Margaret felt the walls of the living room close in, not just from fear of the truth, but from her own crumbling resolve. "Please, Rachel," Sarah pressed again, desperation creeping into her tone. "What I have to say could change everything, not just for you, but for both of you." Driven by instinct to protect her daughter, Margaret felt the tension weave around her like a vice. The very idea that Sarah knew something vital about Rachel's father, a man long absent from their lives, pulled at an ancient wound, one that she had hoped was mostly healed. "Fine," she said suddenly, cutting through the clutter of emotions. "Let's hear it." Rachel's eyes darted from Margaret to Sarah, a mix of panic and indignation. The flicker of vulnerability that passed over her face was fleeting, yet it anchored something deeper in Margaret, a need to be open, a need for trust. Inhaling sharply, Sarah readied herself, her expression turning serious. "Rachel, I don't want to disrupt your life, but your father has been trying to reconnect. He reached out to me." The declaration landed heavily in the room, silence following as if the air had thickened, preventing anyone from speaking.
Margaret observed Rachel's body language, her fists clenched, her defenses rising. "What does that even mean?" she spat, her voice choppy with raw emotion. "It means he wants to explain. He's not the man you think he is," Sarah replied, her eyes softening in earnest. "He's been struggling with his choices. It's not too late, Rachel." Margaret felt a punch in her stomach. Memories of the devastation his absence caused swirled through her mind, each recollection forming a barrier of protectiveness around her heart. She had spent so long constructing a new version of their family, a version untainted by shadows of the past. "Stay away from him," Rachel snapped, the pain evident in her eyes as she slumped back against the sofa, arms encircled tightly around herself.
"Rachel, healing means knowing the truth," Margaret interjected, though her own heart wrestled with the fear of what that truth might be. "Why are you siding with her?" Rachel shot back, tears brimming. "You never wanted to talk about him." Margaret took a deep breath, her resolve wavering against the tide of emotions. "I want you to understand the whole story, not just the pain. Maybe knowing him could help you heal." "Help me heal? I'm fine. You're the one who can't let go." Rachel's voice cracked, reverberating through Margaret's chest. As the argument unfolded, Margaret realized this was not just about Rachel's father. It was about Margaret confronting her own fears, admitting that perhaps she had sheltered Rachel too much in the shadows. There was bravery in facing ghosts, even if that meant unearthing feelings long buried. With newfound clarity, Margaret stepped toward Rachel, her voice gentle but firm. "I need you to trust me when I say this, my love. You cannot move forward if you refuse to face your past." Rachel's expression wavered, conflict dancing in her eyes. The concept of understanding her father, a man she had built a fortress against, now seemed like a threat to her identity. "Sarah's choice to be here isn't to harm you. It's to help us all," Margaret continued. Silence settled again, each person in the room drifting deeper into their thoughts. Margaret could feel the shifting dynamics, a subtle dance of vulnerability, fear, and guarded hope. The moment felt layered with potential, a trembling balance between unraveling and rebuilding. As the atmosphere shifted, Margaret sensed an opportunity rising to the surface. The revelation of who Rachel's father truly was might carve a new path for them, one that demanded understanding, and perhaps forgiveness. Yet the reality remained that they were all standing on the cusp of a daunting journey filled with uncertainty. Would Rachel approach this unknown path, or would she retreat back into her defenses? Margaret's heart pounded with anticipation and dread as she made a choice. It was time for her to guide Rachel away from fear and towards a brave confrontation with the truth. From the corner of the room, Sarah remained silent, her face betraying an extraordinary depth of knowledge yet to be revealed. What more had she uncovered that could either unite or shatter what was left of their family? Margaret swallowed, preparing herself for the question that lingered heavily in the air. How deep does this rabbit hole go, and will their hearts find the strength to follow? The confrontation awaited them, but the outcomes remained shrouded in the very secrets they now sought to unearth. The room felt heavy with unresolved tensions, a swirling current of emotions that demanded to be confronted. Margaret's chest tightened, each breath punctuated by anticipation and fear.
The shadows left by Rachel's father loomed larger, but now they were not alone in the darkness. They had each other, ready to navigate through the chaos. "Rachel," Margaret spoke softly but firmly, breaking the suffocating silence. "We have to face this together. Whatever happens, your past does not have to define who you are now. Understanding your father, as painful as it may provide you the clarity you seek." "Clarity?" Rachel scoffed, tears glistening in her eyes. "You think knowing him will take away the memories of what he chose to do? He was my father, and he chose to abandon us. I hate him." "I understand your anger," Margaret replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "But recognizing how you feel is crucial. Hating him is valid because of what he did, but you deserve the freedom that comes with understanding the full picture, so you're not defined by his choices." Rachel's gaze flickered, and for a moment the anger in her eyes gave way to vulnerability. Margaret seized the moment, stepping closer. She could sense the nuances of fear and uncertainty underpinning Rachel's bravado. "Tell me what you need," Margaret urged, her commitment unwavering. "I'm here. We're all here to support you, whether you choose to engage or walk away. But running from the truth won't bring peace." Rachel's fingers clenched into fists before slowly unraveling, revealing a flicker of contemplation. Margaret recognized the internal battle between the deep-seated resentment and the allure of healing afforded by confrontation. In that fragile space, Sarah spoke again, her tone gentle yet authoritative. "Rachel,
Your father is not just a reflection of the past. He is a flawed man who made mistakes, but there is potential for redemption. I've spoken to him extensively. He realizes the impact of his absence and wants to make amends. This isn't only about him, it's about you too. Margaret caught Rachel's gaze, intending for her to understand the significance of what was unfolding. They were at a crossroads. The revelation of her father's growth could give Rachel the agency to shape her autonomy, free from the shackles of his former sins. But what if it's just more of the same? Rachel's voice trembled with doubt. What if he breaks my heart all over again? Then you will have nothing to lose but the remnants of his hold over you, Margaret replied resolutely. You deserve to live your life unburdened by his past choices. You have the power because he is not the one defining your future. You are. As Margaret spoke, an electric current surged within her, revitalizing her resolve. She had spent her life standing in the shadows, passively witnessing decisions being made about her family. But standing here now, she recognized the strength she had been yearning for, the courage woven into vulnerability. This had become not just an opportunity for Rachel, but a turning point for herself.
Rachel shifted in her seat, her expression unraveling from defiance into contemplation. What if I end up disappointed? She retorted, though the conviction behind the words wavered, a sign that she was opening up to the possibility. Then we will face that disappointment together, Margaret promised, her voice full of warmth and acceptance. Disappointment is part of growth. It's how we learn. Just remember that facing that disappointment is a testament to your courage. You are not alone in this, Rachel. Just then, another wave of uncertainty crashed over Rachel's features, pulling at the edges of the emotional territory they had begun to explore. It was not just Rachel's freedom at stake. It was the family's very fabric that needed to evolve in this moment of reckoning. Let me think, Rachel finally said, her voice softer but resolute. I need to understand it on my own terms. Margaret felt a swell of pride at Rachel's change in tone. It was not about demanding compliance, but encouraging self-empowerment. She knew then, with profound clarity, that her task was not merely to shield Rachel, but to equip her to make the choices that would serve her best. With newfound resolve, Margaret turned to Sarah, silently thanking her for being there, understanding the delicate relationship unearthing this truth entailed. They were enacting a transformation, not simply for Rachel, but for each of them, redefining how they would represent family moving forward. Thank you, Sarah, she said softly, for being an ally today. Your presence signifies the importance of connection in times of uncertainty. Sarah nodded, a mutual respect forming in the warm space created by trust and open dialogue. Whatever happens, I'll be here for both of you. You've got this, she remarked quietly. Together, Rachel murmured, the weight of the word firing a new charge through the air. They were choosing collaboration over conflict. It was no longer about division, but connection, a transformative embrace of authenticity. Margaret held tight to the moment, realizing how deeply she had changed. She had once feared losing her place in the family, but now, by encouraging others to claim their own, she had founded a new home. As they began to embrace the complexity of Rachel's past, Margaret felt her own fears recede. She had stepped into her power, not just as a mother or a matriarch, but as an influential force of change within her family. This was the cornerstone of personal achievement. She had evolved from merely existing within her relationships to actively molding them, and now knew that each conversation was layered with potential. Let's continue to talk and explore. We're embarking on a journey together, and I'll be right here, every step of the way, Margaret concluded, heart resonant with possibility. As they settled into this new resolve, Margaret recognized the transformations echoing beyond their immediate confrontation, that the story they were writing would be defined by understanding, compassion, and shared strength. Now, each day would present new opportunities to reclaim their narrative. But it does not conquer us, Margaret vowed silently, allowing hope to wash over her like a cleansing wave, regardless of the uncertainties that remained. As the sun streamed in once again, illuminating the room, Margaret knew they had cracked open the door to healing, beginning a collaborative evolution toward a more profound future, one strengthened by conversation, respect, and understanding. It was not merely an ending, but a powerful new beginning. It felt stable, solidified by concrete conversations and heartfelt understanding. They had chosen growth, and in doing so, each had assured a reclamation of their individual identities, long tangled in the complexities of family. Time would tell what lay ahead, but she felt equipped to meet whatever arose with the clarity she had unearthed within herself. And it was this moment of growth, the undeniable victory of vulnerability,
marked as the day that her family would step forward into a new narrative together. Now, in this choice of continuous dialogue, they had begun the process of shaping their ties with love rather than fear. Margaret's heart swelled with pride. They had done it. They had faced the shadows together, assuring that while the past may attempt to shape them, it would not govern their trajectory. As she shared smiles with Jake and Rachel, she embraced the profound courage it took to engage fully in life, ensuring each moment mattered in the narrative they were crafting together. Life would surely present challenges ahead, but together they would forge onward, stronger, clearer, and undeniably united. And with that realization, Margaret felt the most profound sense of achievement, a testament that they had chosen to shape their family legacy anew. It was time to celebrate this monumental growth, for they had conquered their fears together and dared to embrace authenticity. Now, with a heart buoyed by hope, Margaret looked forward to tomorrow, ready to rise again alongside those she loved. How fulfills each endeavor become when voices are united, when truth shines light in the dark. And as she navigated this uncharted territory ahead, she grasped the truth profoundly. This was just the beginning, a call and commitment to live fully, to continue exploring the vast expanse of their shared future, together. The new chapters beckoned, leaving her filled with fulfillment and a resounding sense of pride. You need to subscribe now to follow along with personal overcoming stories like this one.
Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and show your support for these incredible narratives. Comment your reactions and theories about Rachel's future and their heartfelt journey together. Don't wait even one more second to share this moment of transformation. Send this video to at least 5 friends who need to see how powerful connection and understanding can be.